Dark Phoenix was released a whole year ago. I feel like I should address this fact as people didn't really care much about the film when it was released, so I can only imagine how much less they care a year later. So why make a lengthy video about this film now? I can't expect that this will be a video that people are eager to check out. Shouldn't I have made this video a little closer to when the film was released, and was at least somewhat of a valid topic of discussion? Yes, probably. As someone who has been an X-Men fan since about age 4, it would make sense for me to have hated this film and want to tear it apart. But that's not really the case here. My feelings about this film are, much like the film itself, muddled and convoluted. Honestly, one of the reasons I've taken so long to produce this video is that I've struggled to put into words how I truly felt about Dark Phoenix. The film had a lot going against it prior to its release. It was released only a matter of weeks after Avengers Endgame, which had the anticipation of the most important film ever. It was constantly getting its release date pushed back, which always instills confidence in a film, and had 3 different officially announced release dates. It could be argued that Days of Future Past in 2014 and Logan in 2017 each felt like what should have been the end of the X-Men film franchise, and now it was just overstaying its welcome. The X-Men films had displayed various levels of quality over its 19 years of existence. Audiences could have also just generally been ready to move on, with the X-Men characters joining the MCU being imminent after Disney purchasing Fox. Simon Kinberg, who worked as a writer on X-Men 3, seemed determined to get an adaptation of the Dark Phoenix saga storyline from the comics right this time around. In late 2017, descriptions popped up online of what was being done with Xavier as a public figure, focus on Cyclops and Jean's relationship, Magneto migrating to Genosha, and the X-Men doing a space mission leading to Jean being possessed by the Phoenix Force. It was all very exciting for me to hear as an X-Men fan. Much of my anticipation seemed warranted when we got the first trailer, although the film's release date was then pushed back a day or so after we got this initial trailer. Kinberg, a first-time director, wouldn't have been my first choice to direct. However, he very clearly has a love for the X-Men, although he's also been involved as a writer and producer on X-Men films, both good and bad.
Hey, I'm Josh Trank.
And I am Simon Kinberg.
And this is our breakdown of the Fantastic Four trailer.
So stick around, because we're giving you an exclusive inside look.
What I did like about Kinberg was the team that he chose to assemble behind the camera. Mauro Fiore was director of photography, Lee Smith was the editor, and Hans Zimmer was the composer. While Kinberg might not be experienced as a director, he surrounded himself with very experienced and very successful people in their fields, as well as a great returning ensemble cast. While many were cynical going into this film, I had remained optimistic, but then the dreaded Rotten Tomatoes score was revealed. Boy, was that a punch in the gut.
I know how you feel about it, Wolverine, but...
You know nothing, little man.
While I personally never look at a film's Rotten Tomatoes score as a guaranteed sign that a film will be good or bad, the film's 23% score validated a lot of people who never gave this film a chance. I was disappointed to see the film virtually kicked while it was already down. As I alluded to earlier, I find it really difficult to definitively say whether I think this is a good film or a bad film, and whether I like this film or not. It kind of falls in the just fine category for me. I think there are aspects of the film that are very good. However, those aspects are weighed down by other things that I felt left a lot to be desired. I don't know how much of the film was affected by the apparent change of Jessica Chastain's character and her group of evil aliens, but I think it's by far the weakest aspect of the film. So on that note, let's discuss what I thought were the major negatives, and start there. Number 1. The antagonists. I like Jessica Chastain as an actress a lot, but unfortunately I felt her character was incredibly bland. In Chastain's defense, much of her dialogue is expository, so she really didn't have a lot to work with here. I only know that her character's name is Vuk because I looked it up. This group of aliens are called the Dabari, which we get told in a scene very clearly ADR'd to give us this information.
Navka Astra, Ake Kya In Unash. I know the Dabari are a race of aliens from Marvel Comics, but there was so much secrecy over who Chastain was playing going into the film that I figured she had to be playing someone of importance in X-Men lore. Her presence in the film is a little reminiscent of Jason Wingard, Mastermind, a character from the comics who tries to manipulate Jean for her powers through use of illusions. His character was also the inspiration for Jason Stryker in X-Men 2. The big rumour online was that she was playing Lilandra, who plays a big role in the Phoenix Saga storyline of the comics. I figured if she wasn't playing Lilandra or another Shi'ar character, it would have to be a major X-Men character who they'd want to reveal during the film as a surprise, such as Mr. Sinister maybe. pale complexion, Cyclops and Jean as lead characters. After all, let's not forget that he was teased in the after-credit scene of X-Men Apocalypse. Boy, I'm glad that tease was for nothing. However, she was a member of the Dabari, and this was kept a secret in the marketing of the film because... I have no idea. I know that the rumour is that these characters were originally going to be Skrulls, and based on this concept art and this interview with Ty Sheridan, it appears that that was the case.
Originally, it was scripted that Charles and Scott go to the UN and tell the president that, hey, we're under attack by aliens. Okay. And there's this huge battle between the guards at the UN and Jean Grey, and all the guards turn out to be Skrulls. Scott is fighting Skrulls in the fountain. He gets thrown into the fountain in front of the UN. And then Jean comes down and basically fights all of the Skrulls off and basically says goodbye to Scott and Charles. Okay. And then it's all over, I guess.
Obviously, after the Skrulls were being used in Captain Marvel, it would appear that another direction was decided upon, but that doesn't really explain why Chastain's role was kept a secret. It's also unclear throughout the film what the Dabari can even do. Vuk might be psychic? I assume she's projecting all of this into Jean's mind. I think they can shapeshift, but they don't shapeshift into various people. They can maybe control things with their mind? I don't know. What's also unclear is how many of them travel to Earth. For a while in the film we just see modest groups of them, then suddenly in the final battle with the X-Men, there appears to be hundreds of them always appearing and jumping on the train, an endless supply of Dabari aliens for the X-Men to fend off. The nameless, faceless army of cannon fodder bad guys is disappointing and, quite frankly, overdone in superhero films, as is the character who wants to destroy the Earth just because they can.
Your lives mean nothing. Your world will be ours.
You'd kill us all.
I don't want to spend the entire video comparing this to other X-Men films, but trust me, I'll be doing that a lot. Other X-Men films feature antagonists with interesting and complex ideologies that you could even understand from a certain point of view.
If we can control that power, we can resurrect our race. Begin again. Here.
It's disappointing. Number 2. The timeline. Or, let's skip 10 years again. It's easy to point to the X-Men franchise when it comes to discussing movie timelines that make no sense. After the first 3 films, the people in charge of some of these films clearly didn't care about established timelines, and I guess thought the audience didn't care either. Boy, were they wrong. The worst culprits of this are X-Men Origins Wolverine and X-Men First Class. It's actually kind of amusing seeing the Wolverine or Days of Future Past try and course correct and make everything that came before it canon. However, if you just look at First Class, Days of Future Past, and Apocalypse in a bubble as a timeline, I think it's actually just fine. I'm not saying that makes up for ignoring established lore in the original films, or even that everything in these 3 films line up perfectly. It's always bothered me that Mystique is reminiscent of her time in the X-Men, despite the fact that the team was named after she abandoned Xavier for Magneto.
You're... X-Men.
Yeah, so I like the sound of that.
We called ourselves the X-Men.
However, Dark Phoenix is where these films being set once every decade really takes its toll for me. Yes, it's unreasonable that Xavier and Magneto should look like this 30 years after this, especially when they're meant to look like this in only a matter of years. But when these actors are so good in these roles, I can forgive this. What is hard to forgive is how important character development is tossed aside because it just seems like a neat idea to set the film in 1992. And don't get me wrong, I love the idea of setting an X-Men film in '92. It's one of the most important years in the history of the X-Men. But skipping a whole decade so that we don't see Cyclops and Jean's relationship develop, or Cyclops take on more of a responsibility in the team, or Mystique teach what she's learned from a lifetime of being a survivor, or Xavier become a celebrated mutant icon, or mutants in general be accepted and actually loved by a large part of society, is a damn shame. We meet the characters again after all this interesting stuff has already happened. On an amusing note, at the end of Days of Future Past, we see the future for this new timeline, where Jean is alive and well. I guess there's a tease that she's still out there at the end of the film, but still.
I evolved beyond this world.
Where else would I be?
Number 3. The Phoenix Force. First, I do want to say that I thought Sophie Turner was great in the role, and I would have really liked to have seen more films with her as Jean Grey. Now, it's unclear what exactly the Phoenix Force does to Jean. Does it just screw around with her mind? Does it just amp up her powers? Does it give her another personality? I ask these questions because X-Men Apocalypse treated it like a big deal that Jean turned into the Phoenix at the end of that film, but the only reason we don't follow up on the story of Jean now having to find a balance between control and letting go is because Simon Kinberg wanted to do a Phoenix origin closer to the comics. I respect giving fans what they think they want, but what the Phoenix Force does to Jean really needed to be explained better. Remember at the beginning of X-Men 2, where Jean and Cyclops have a conversation about how Jean's powers are growing?
Ever since Liberty Island, you've been different. A month ago, you had to concentrate just to levitate a book or a chair across the room. Now, when you have a nightmare, the entire bedroom shakes.
It quickly establishes that the events of the previous film have had consequences that will now affect our characters going forward. Here, the characters act as if Jean's powers are out of control for the first time. It seems the Phoenix Force does make Jean do bad things, but the very worst thing she does is kill Mystique, which happens by accident. If the Phoenix Force took over and caused Jean to intentionally kill Mystique, I think moments like this would have meant a little more.
Why did I do that?
In theory, this scene works well as a juxtaposition to Jean killing Xavier in X-Men 3. One is an accident caused by Jean being out of control, and the other is with intent, but also caused by Jean being out of control. However, in X-Men 3, we know Jean has completely lost control, and in this film it's unclear and kind of inconsistent how in control Jean is. In an attempt to adapt the Phoenix Saga storyline closer to the comics, unfortunately I thought they produced a much messier script. Number 4. Mystique. I was never much of a fan of the choices made with Jennifer Lawrence's Mystique, even going back to First Class. Being mutant and proud translates to mutant and naked, with kind of a creepy angle where Magneto tells Raven that he wouldn't sleep with her because she's too young.
Maybe in a few years.
But then presumably does sleep with her once she embraces looking like Mystique, and inspires her by comparing her to an animal in the wild.
Have you ever looked at a tiger and thought you ought to cover it up?
So does that mean that Beast should also just walk around nude, just because he doesn't have the same physical appearance as Magneto?
Perfection.
What about Nightcrawler? Or Apocalypse? Or Toad? Magneto comparing Mystique to an animal in what is supposed to be an empowering moment has always felt very tone-deaf to me. But, since First Class, we see Mystique go on a journey from outlaw liberator to rebel icon to reluctant mentor. It's a funny story to tell with Mystique in terms of adapting the character from the comics, but on paper it works. She's always able to outrun the people who'd be after her because she can transform into anyone. The problem with this Mystique is that she constantly transforms into Jennifer Lawrence, because these films need to remind us that they star Jennifer Lawrence. I do understand that applying this makeup is incredibly time-consuming and would be extremely uncomfortable to wear, but you can't help but notice that this franchise lucked out by casting Lawrence just before she blew up and became a star. Also notice how in her time playing this character, Lawrence's Mystique makeup has gone from this to this. So we have this film where I think it's apparent that Lawrence clearly doesn't care as much as she once did, is killed off as early as possible, but not before some head-scratching moments like this.
I can't actually remember the last time you were the one risking something. And by the way, the women are always saving the men around here. You might want to think about changing the name to X-Women.
In the scene right before this one, the whole X-Men team worked together to save the astronauts. Everyone has a role. Even Xavier plays a part from Earth by using Cerebro to communicate with NASA. So right after that scene we get this line that comes so out of left field and doesn't have any bearing on the events of the film at all. I think the X-Men features some of the best female characters in all of comics, so in another X-Men story, this line wouldn't necessarily be out of place. But if you're gonna put this line in there, at least give it some reason to exist. To top it all off, we only get one short scene between Mystique and Jean, the only interaction we see between these two characters, prior to this. Going back to my point earlier about comparing these two scenes, we know and have seen the relationship between Jean and Xavier by this point in X-Men 3. In Dark Phoenix, we get little to no interaction between these two characters before Jean accidentally kills Mystique. And I'll be honest, seeing Mystique killed off early in the film didn't really upset me in the slightest. but it's rather annoying when a film has to tell you that a character is important to these other characters without really showing you. I guess I should also mention that the decision to kill off Mystique also briefly makes Beast totally okay with Magneto planning to murder Jean.
The girl dies.
That's a weird choice for arguably the most level-headed X-Men character. You know how despite looking like a beast, Hank McCoy is actually a reasonable, thoughtful, and gentle giant? Did you forget that? Also, remember how Mystique was Storm's hero and caused her to switch sides and help stop Apocalypse in the previous film? Just look at how distraught Storm is now that her hero is dead. Oh well. That brings me to my next point. Number 5. Storm and Nightcrawler. Storm is completely one-dimensional in this film and has no discernible character arc at all. Nightcrawler somehow has less character than that. I like the moment where Storm tells Cyclops that she's got his back, a nice nod to their friendship in the source material. I like that Nightcrawler goes nuts in the train fight and straight up murders one of the aliens by teleporting them in front of a speeding train. But besides these little moments, they just don't have anything to do. A good example of this is at the party that the students are throwing outside the school. Cyclops walks up to Storm and Nightcrawler for another drink and to ask if they think that Jean is acting differently. Can you guess what they were doing before Cyclops walked up to them? They're doing nothing. They're just standing there. I don't even know if they were having a conversation. I'm not saying that I think they should have had significant focus or anything. I think both characters are very well cast and I enjoy seeing these characters on screen. I know it's an ensemble film and not every character can get the same level of depth, but we don't get any sense at all about how they feel about the events in this film. Does Storm want to save Jean? She's all about stopping Magneto and Beast from getting to Jean, but right before also tells Cyclops this.
She killed Raven. Maybe you can't admit that to yourself or to them, but it's the truth. Sometimes you want to believe people are something that they are not. And then by the time you realize who they are, it's too late.
Again, Nightcrawler we get even less insight into. Number 6. Quicksilver. He was the breakout character from Days of Future Past, and his infamous speedster scene in the Pentagon was one of the most memorable moments in the film. In Apocalypse, they tried their very best to top that scene in the sequence where he saves everybody in the school as it explodes. I will admit that there's something kinda neat about giving the impression that he's going to have his speedster scene here and immediately taking it away to present the Phoenix as a threat. But after he crashes and burns, we're not given any update on his condition and he's never seen again until a quick 5-second scene at the end of the film. Also in Apocalypse, we see Quicksilver struggle with whether or not to tell Magneto that he's his son. It's left as a cliffhanger, basically begging to be followed up on in a sequel. Not only do we not get that moment in this film, but it's not even slightly hinted at if within this decade that's passed, whether or not Quicksilver did build up the courage to tell Magneto. Once again, I know that not every character can be equally important to the story, but it's sad seeing such a crowd-pleasing character from the previous films treated like this, especially when a future character arc was teased in the previous film. Number 7. The ending. I don't know how more people haven't complained about this, but the ending of this film felt like when you're watching a live TV presentation, and they just need to end that thing now before they go outside their allocated time slot. Jean flies into space, destroys Fuck. The characters, including her boyfriend, get 0 time to digest Jean's death, before we go to our next scene where the school is renamed, Beast is the new headmaster, Magneto and a buff Xavier play chess, and there's a tease that Jean may still be out there, and we're done. We don't get to see how the events of this film affected any of the characters. Remember how distraught the characters were in X-Men 2 when Jean sacrificed herself to save everyone? Remember how we get several scenes with our main characters dealing with this tragedy? We don't get anything even slightly close to that here. Xavier is retired for some reason. Beast, who wanted to murder Jean earlier, is rewarded by getting to be the new school headmaster, and the school is renamed after Jean even though her actions are the catalyst for the government turning their backs on mutants again. After watching the relationship between Xavier and Magneto over 4 films, it feels like they should get a meatier scene to end the film than this. It does feel apropos that the final Fox X-Men film ends with these 2 characters playing chess, but a bit of a debrief over what these characters had been through over all this time would have been nice. In the interview snippet I played earlier, Ty Sheridan indicated that they had reshot the ending multiple times.
I think we even reshot that sequence like twice or 3 times. Yeah. It's really hard for me to remember what the ending of this movie is.
Really? No kidding.
On the home video release, we have some deleted scenes intended for the film's ending. In the trailers, some that were released within the month of the film's release featured footage that didn't make it into the final cut of the film. I know that's not always unusual, but I think it does indicate that this ending was being played around with a lot before what was settled on, hence how rushed it comes across. Okay, now let me discuss some of the things in the film that I do like. Number 1, cinematography and action set pieces. I like the look of the film. It never really looks washed out or flat, and you can tell that the actors are in actual locations. As compared to other films like this, the settings in the film are quaint. I like the scene where Magneto's team fight the X-Men in a busy New York street, while both trying to get to Jean. It's chaotic and messy with a point, and I love that the fight basically ends when Magneto goes overboard and digs up an old underground train. I guess my only criticism of this scene is that these two characters are just random mutants on Magneto's side that we don't get any insight into, but they're just intended to be henchmen, so it's fine. I also liked how the final battle takes place on a moving train and not a CGI wasteland. Due to the confines of the train, the film manages to find interesting things to do with the characters' powers in this fight. I thought this sequence was very well done, and the film arguably feels the most alive during this sequence. Number 2. Magneto. I didn't think Magneto was necessary to this story, but I will never say that I don't enjoy watching Michael Fassbender as Magneto. He's fantastic in the role, and he brings such depth to the tragic story of Eric Lenscher. Just when you think this guy is living a peaceful life, something comes along and takes it away from him. He's filled with such anger and pain that he can't help but let that side of him take over, even when deep down he knows it's wrong. He knows it's wrong to kill Sebastian Shaw, but he does it because he wants revenge for the death of his mother. He knows it's wrong to kill Mystique or the President, but he tries to anyway because he believes he's doing right by the mutant race. He gets convinced that wiping out humanity is justified because his family was taken away from him, so he embraces that dark side of himself that people won't let him forget. All of this on top of being a Holocaust survivor. Here, we have Magneto living in a community of mutants, seemingly a life of peace. Until Jean and the military come along and screw it all up. Magneto taking the easy and vengeful way out by wanting to kill Jean for killing Mystique makes sense for Magneto to do. Even after he explains to Jean how and why he stopped killing, he can't help but go back to that. Revenge is basically his default reaction. He's reminded that revenge isn't what Mystique would have wanted, and works with the X-Men to stop the real bad guys from getting to Jean. Yes, I'm disappointed the tease of Quicksilver revealing that he's Magneto's son is never addressed, but I love watching this character. I have to admit the sigh of relief I let out in the cinema at just seeing Magneto appear on screen for the first time in the film. Number 3. Costumes. I love that part of Xavier's plan of synergy between the X-Men and the government includes the team wearing matching outfits. Yes, there were some cool, comic, accurate suits at the end of Apocalypse. It made for a neat ending and made me excited for the future of these characters. But for the purposes of this film, the X-Men being dressed in team uniforms makes perfect sense for how Xavier is trying to present the X-Men to the rest of the world. And after years of people complaining about the X-Men not wearing comic, accurate costumes, you really can't complain about that here. Number 4. Mutants in society. As the world begins to accept mutants, we're now at the point where the President and Xavier have a private telephone line that the President will call in situations where the X-Men can help. But as soon as something significant goes wrong and mutants can be pinned to blame, the government turns their backs on mutants again. Xavier went from receiving a medal one day to his private line with the President being closed the next, all because of the actions of one person. It's a great commentary on the judge first, ask questions later nature of cancel culture, except it's within the guidelines of bigotry and discrimination issues that the X-Men tackle. I enjoyed that angle in the film a lot. Number 5. Jean forcing Xavier to walk. It's a fair criticism to say that not enough is done with Jean being upset with Xavier when she discovers that her father is alive. However, I love that it leads to this moment.
You can do anything you set your mind to.
So show me. Walk to me.
No. Please, Jean.
Please.
It's haunting and cruel. I honestly wish there were more moments like this with the Phoenix during the film. Number 6. Dazzler. Hey look, it's Dazzler. Number 7. Cyclops. Those who know me know I love Cyclops. He's my favourite character in all of fiction. It's no secret that he really hadn't gotten his due in the original X-Men films. While I love James Marsden in the role, and the first 2 films do still treat him as an important character to some degree, his screen time is lessened and lessened until he's killed off screen in X-Men 3. And Xavier, his father figure, hardly gives a damn.
I think she killed Scott.
So you can imagine my delight when he was treated as an important character with a bit of an arc in Apocalypse. I gave that film a lot of praise at the time, and I can't lie, Cyclops' focus and Ty Sheridan's portrayal are the main reasons why I enjoyed that film as much as I did. As I mentioned earlier, Scott's motivation to becoming the leader we know isn't really addressed, but what we do get with Scott are scenes where he feels like a real person. Scott and Jean feel like a real couple. You believe and understand Scott when he wants to help and protect Jean. These are 2 of my favourite scenes in the film, and I attribute this to the chemistry between Ty Sheridan and Sophie Turner. Seeing Cyclops in combat is something I've really wanted to see since X-Men 2. It might seem lame to say I wanted more action, but one of the best things about Cyclops is the control and discipline he displays in spite of having a completely uncontrollable power. I saw this film in a relatively quiet and intimate cinema, so if you could have seen my reaction when this happened.
Save it. If you touch her, I will fucking kill you.
I had a verbal reaction that I don't think I can recreate that several people in the cinema turned around and reacted to. But seriously, this film gave me Cyclops as a main character after years and years of being disappointed with how such an important character from the source material could be pushed aside so badly. Well, I guess that's it. That's all I really have to say. And with this film comes the end of the X-Men film saga. It's easy to forget that Marvel was a complete underdog and virtually unknown in the film industry when the first X-Men film was released in 2000. But with its release came the popularization of comic book movies, for better or for worse. In hindsight, Fox did well in not rebooting the franchise as quickly as they could like so many others did with their properties. I know they did in a sense by starting a new timeline, but also, 17 years after the release of the first X-Men film, we got a film where Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart played Wolverine and Xavier. Fox allowed James Mangold and Hugh Jackman to make the film they wanted to make with Logan, and I really appreciate that. After the success that the X-Men franchise had experienced, it is sad to see it end with such a disappointing critical response, and $252 million in the box office worldwide against its $200 million budget. I respect the effort of Simon Kinberg. He was a first-time director just wanting to make a good film about characters he loves. It's very clear from watching the behind-the-scenes material that all the actors loved working with him, and were excited to see him direct based on working with him in the previous films. He had the unenviable task here of doing the Phoenix Saga storyline again, and did what he thought the fans would enjoy. Something a little closer to the source material. I don't think he quite succeeded, but I respect the intent. Nonetheless, the X-Men film franchise has finally been put to rest. Well, sort of. I guess the New Mutants film is still due to be released sometime. It's had more release date changes than Dark Phoenix, if you can believe that. And it's currently slated to be released in cinemas this August. We'll see about that. Maybe it'll get released online quietly, who knows. You know, we originally got the first trailer for that in October of 2017. Anyway, so long X-Men. It was an interesting ride over the past 20 years. We'll see what Marvel Studios has in store for you, I guess.